Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom, welcome back to today's Daf, which is YOMA Lamed Gimel. We begin 3 lines from the top of the Amud. It says the Gemara, Abaye Mesader Ma'arocha. Abaye presented the Seder of the Ma'arocha. Now, Ma'arocha is a term generally referring to the wood arrangement of the Mizbeach. But in this case, it's simply referring to the Seder of the Avodos, which took place on a daily basis in the Beis HaMikdash, not Yom Kippur. We're speaking throughout the year. So Abaye presented for us the daily schedule of the Beis HaMikdash. Mesader Ma'arocha, Mishmei de Gemara. This was said in the name of Gemara. Says Rashi, Gemara means Kulei Yeshiva, the entire Yeshiva, referring specifically to the Rabbanan, the Beit Midrash. The Rabbanan Beis Medrash had a Kabbalah, had a tradition that this is the way the schedule went on a daily basis in the Beis HaMikdash. Ve'aliba da Abul Shol. Now this is a side point, that one aspect of Abaye's presentation will follow Abul Shol's Shita. What is he referring to? So if you remember back on Daf Yud Daled, we discussed the machlekes between Abul Shol and the Rabbanan regarding the timing of Haktoras Keteris. Abul Shol maintained the Kohen would bring the Keteris following the entire sequence of Hatavas HaNeiros. When he completed all 7 Neiros, cleaning them out, replenishing the oil, the wicks, then he would proceed to Keteris. Whereas according to the Rabbanan, Keteris came right in the middle of Hatavas HaNeiros. He would first clean out 5 Neiros, then do the Keteris, and then conclude the Hatava on the final 2 Neiros. So Abaye's presentation will actually follow Abul Shol's Shita that Keteris was after the entire Hatava process. Okay, so what was the schedule? The day began with the Ma'arocha Gdoila. The Kohen would arrange the large firewood arrangement on the Mizbeach, intended for the Karban Tamid and all other Karbanis which were burnt on that Ma'arocha. Ma'arocha Gdoila, the larger arrangement, that comes first, and that's Kodemes the Ma'arocha Shniya Shel Keteris. It comes before the smaller Ma'arocha, which was intended to supply coals for the Keteris. You take some coals from that heap of the second Ma'arocha, the heap of coal there, and bring it to the Mizbeach HaPnimi for the Keteris. Asks Tosfos, what happened to the Tumas HaDeshen, which should really come before the Ma'arocha Gdoila? So he says because it was generally done at night. We're discussing the schedule as it begins from daybreak. Continues the Gemara. So first came the Ma'arocha Gdoila, and then the Ma'arocha Shniya, the smaller arrangement. Ma'arocha Shniya Shel Keteris, Kodemes, that came before L'Sidur Shnei Gzirei. That preceded the arrangement of the 2 blocks of wood, which were also placed back on the Ma'arocha Gdoila. So first we have a Ma'arocha Gdoila, followed by the Ma'arocha Shniya, followed by Sidur Shnei Gzirei. The Sidur Shnei Gzirei, these 2 Gzirei preceded Kodem. They came before L'Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi, before cleaning out the Mizbeach HaPnimi from its ashes. V'Dishon Mizbeach HaPnimi, that came before Kodem L'Hatavas Chamesh Neiros, prior to cleaning out the 5 Neiros of the Menorah. V'Hatavas Chamesh Neiros, Kodem, that came before L'Dam HaTamid. Rashi says Dam HaTamid means the Shechita and Zrika of the Karban Tamid. So first, he tended to the 5 Neiros, cleaned them out, replenished the oil and wick supply, and then proceeded to the Karban Tamid, V'Dam HaTamid, Koidem, L'Hatavas Shtei Neiros, which was done in advance of cleaning out the final 2 Neiros of the Menorah. V'Hatavas Shtei Neiros, Koidem, the Keteris, and that preceded the Keteris, which is in line with Abul Shol, who says that Keteris came after the entire Hatava process. Ukteris Koidem Leivarim. Keteris preceded the akrava of the Varim, of the Karban Tamid. And actually the Gemara soon will bring Mekoris for every step of the way. Let's just finish the entire sequence. The Varim al-Mincha, the akrava of the Vari HaTamid on the Ma'arocha Gdoila preceded the akrava of the mincha which came with the tamid. Umincha lechavitin. Mincha came before the chavitin, That was the mincha that the Kohen Gadol would supply on a daily basis. The chavitin l'nesachan. Chavitin preceded the nesachan, which came together with the Tamid Shal Shachar. And if we're speaking on Shabbos, we have another 2 steps. U'nesachan u'musafin. Nesachan preceded the karbonos musaf, which followed nesachan. U'musafin le'bazichan. And musafin led into the bazichan, the aktorah of the 2 spoonfuls of teres, which were taken off the shulchan together with the last week's lechem apanim supply. And finally, we have ubazichin. The bazichin preceded l'tamid sheben abayim, which was the last carbon of the day. Generally speaking, of course, there were exceptions on Erev Pesach, etc. Generally, the tamid sheben abayim was the last on the list. How do we know that? Shenamar, because way back by the carbon shel shachar, what does the pasuk say? He's meant to set up the marach g'dola, v'hikter aleha. The pasuk says v'orach aleha oila, and v'hikter aleha chel v'hashlamim. Now, why discuss shlamim here? The Gemara uses the pasuk for a drasha. Aleha hashleim kol karbonos kulan. Aleha, together with the tamid shel shachar, hashleim. Shlamim is like hashleim, complete. Bring together with the tamid shel shachar the entire supply. Kol karbonos kulan, throughout the day. They meant to accompany the Karban Shel Shachar. Karban Shel Shachar is number 1. Following the Tamid, you have all the other Karbanis. And they go together with Tamid Shel Shachar. Tamid Shel Bayim is a stand-alone Karban that's separate from the rest of the day, and that's meant to be last. So we learn from here that Tamid Shel Bayim is the last and final Karban of the day. Let's go over to Rashi. 4 lines from the top of the Amud. Abayi misadeh maroch mishmei de Gemara. Mono Seder Avodos shall call Yom V'Yom. He presented the daily schedule. Mishmei de Gemara, the Kula Yeshiva, the Rabban V'Medrash. Valibed Avashol. It followed Avashol, the Amar Perakama. Hatavas Kol Haneros, Koid Mois Lektoris. Lektoris followed the entire Hatavas Haneros. Maroch Gdoila. This was the large arrangement on the Mizbeach. That came first. Shalom Yaktiru Kol Haktoris. Koidemes l'seder. It proceeds in order lefnei ha'maracha shniya. It comes prior to the second maracha. She'oisen v'ker maravis droimes, which is arranged in the mar of Durham corner of the mizbeach. Moshach v'naker and da'at amis. 4 amis pulled from the corner. L'tzat safain to esnam b'zechas tam. And that was called the maracha shniya shel ketoris. Why? It says Rashi shel ketoris shemimena choitin gechalim. From that second maracha, you would scoop out coals, lahachas l'mizbeach pnimi, shachas v'arvis, lahaktir le'akteris, tamid, pras shachris, pras v'narbayim. This second maracha would supply the coals, which were brought into the mizbeach pnimi, on which they would be maktir the akteris, a portion in the morning and a portion in the afternoon. So these 2 marachas came before the Sidur Shnei Gzirin Shemesadrin Ala Maracha Gdoila, which were placed on the large Maracha. V'kulu Tami Mefarish L'Kamei, says Rashi. Of course, everything will be proven from the Psukim, which will provide the sources for all these Hakravis in their proper order. And then came the Damatamid L'Shchita L'Srika, K'teres Shamas Becha Pnimi Kedemes Le'evorim Lahakter Eivori HaTamid on Mizbeach HaChitzon. Torah came before Hakrava of the Eivorim on Mizbeach HaChitzon, which came before the Mincha. Minchas Niska Shal Tamid. This was a standard Minchas Nesachim with the Tamid. V'in Yischein Dechsiv Avasir Seif Asos Mincha L'Nesachim L'Nasech Gein Shal Tamid. L'Nesachim came before the Musafin Im Shabbasu. Shenemar, and this applies to the last item on the list, the Tamid Sheben Abayim. Why was it last? Shenemar V'hikter Aleach Al Ve'ashlamim. V'darish le'lashon hashlama. Shlamim is a lashon hashlama, completion. Aleha, on that, on the oilas, Tamid Shel Shachar, Hamura B'rosh HaMikra, Shenemar, V'orach Aleha Oila, V'hikter, V'hoisef, V'hashlam, Achareha Kol HaKarbonis. And add to the Tamid Shel Shachar, attach to it all the Karbonis throughout the day. Tamid Shel Shachar triggers, enables all the other Karbonis who accompany it. V'loi al shel ben harbayim. they don't relate to the afternoon Tamid. Limid al Tamid Sheben Arbaim Shu Achron Kol Karbanis. This teaches us that Tamid Sheben Arbaim is the last of all Karbanis. Let's get back to the Gemara. Amar Mar, we just learned that the daily schedule in Beis Hamikdash took place as follows. Amar Mar, Marocha Gdoila Kodemes LeMarocha Shnei Shel Kteres. First came the Marocha Gdoila, which preceded this small Marocha. Menolan, how do we know that? The Tanya, the pasuk says that the Oila was placed on the Moikta. Hi ha'Oila al Moikta. Rashi explains Moikta is Loshen Meduras Eitzim. The same thing with Tukad. It's referring to a pile of firewood, burning wood. So the Oila was on Moikta, had its own pile of wood. Al Mazbeach Alayla. Zuma Rachel Gdoila is referring to the larger arrangement intended for the Oila and all the other Karbanos. Since it's mentioned in the pasuk first, that's meant to be arranged first. Ve'esham Mazbeach Tukad Boy, which is the next part of the pasuk, meant to have a source, an additional source of fire, an additional pile of wood. Zuma Rachashni Shel Kteres, referring to the second arrangement intended to supply the coals for the Kteres. Since it's mentioned second in the pasuk, it's meant to be tended to second. Perhaps I should switch things around. Why would I think to switch things around? Explains Rashi, because in any case, the pasuk is really somewhat out of order. The pasuk says, Zois Torah Sa'ila, Hi ha'Oila al Moikta, al Mazbeach Kol ha'Layla. Ve'esha Mazbeach Tukad Bay. Now, the first part is referring to something going on at night, which is past the day's events. So in reality, it's describing something later. And then it says Ve'esha Mazbeach Tukad Bay, which is describing the arrangement in the morning. So the pasuk seems to be out of order. Although it mentions the larger Marocha first, but as far as the timing, as far as the reference, it's referring to the nighttime, which is after the day's events. So perhaps we want to follow the pasuk literally. Have that done later. And the Esha Mizbeach Tukad Boy first. How do you know to follow this sequence as proposed earlier? First, you meant to do the Marocha Gdoila mentioned first in the pasuk, and then the Marocha Shnia mentioned second. If in any case the pasuk is out of order, it's not Keseder, then perhaps the Marocha Shnia takes precedence. Arrange that first, and then the Marocha Gdoila. Ve'ifachanof. Answers the Gemara Mistavra that Marocha Gdoila adif. Let's assume the Marocha Gdoila takes precedence because it has an element of superiority, which puts it higher than the Marocha Shnia. Why? Shekain kaparasa meruba. Because the Marocha Gdoila, on which they would be marked through all the karbanos throughout the day, starting from Tom Shel Shachar, straight throughout the day, it had enhanced capacity. It had kaparasa meruba. It accomplished many kaparos as far as the quantity, as far as the ability to be machaper. It did way more than the smaller ma'aracha, which was merely meant to supply coals for the Ketores. That leads us to assume that the Marocha Gdoila should be arranged first. It's more chashuv. Adarabba says the more just the opposite. We find an element of superiority present in the second Marocha, the smaller one, which is not present in the larger one. Adarabba Marocha Shni Adifa. Shekain machnisin mimenu lefnim, because remember the small Marocha supplies coals for the Heichal. Those coals will be brought to the Mizbeach HaPnimi in the Heichal, on which they will be marked the Ketores. So it has that qualitative edge over the Marocha Gdoila, which doesn't have that function. Even so, says the Gemara, in this case, quantity overrides quality. The fact that the Marocha Gdoila was the primary Marocha, which served all the karbanos throughout the day, that goes first. Another pshat can be, suppose he doesn't have sufficient supply of firewood to supply the small maracha. Miloi ma'ayil mimaracha gdoila. Would he not supply his coals for the Ketores from the larger maracha? So technically, theoretically, maracha gdoila can also supply coals for the Heichel. It has that capacity as well. So combine the two elements. Number one, the quantitative element, the fact that it's kaparos meruba, designated to do many more kaparis than the smaller maracha. And regarding your question, well, it doesn't have the ability to supply for the Heichel. Well, it does. It can do that as well. So combine both factors and put it ahead. Continues the Gemara. Maracha shniya shel Ketores kodemes l'sidur shnei gzirei eitzim. You tell me that the smaller maracha precedes the placement of the two gzirei eitzim on the maracha gdola. Minolan, how do we know this? T'chsiv u'bi'er oleho hakoyin eitzim ba'boiker ba'boiker. Pasuk says the kohen will add these two blocks of wood on the maracha gdola. Ba'boiker ba'boiker. Oleho. The Torah mentions the word oleho. Place the eitzim on where? On the maracha gdola. V'lo yachaverta. Doesn't that indicate that there's a choice at hand? He's faced with a choice. He has two addresses for the wood. Two possible destinations. He has a maracha gdola and another one next to it. And Torah has to tell you, allow. Put it on the same one that the oil is placed on. What does that indicate to you? That he has already arranged two marachas prior to adding the shnei gzirei eitzim on the maracha gdola. Mechlal, the Yisrael Chaverta, apparently the other one is there. He already has two. And now he uses the larger maracha as a destination for shnei gzirei eitzim. So we learn from here that it's maracha gdola, maracha shniya, and then shnei gzirei eitzim. Vayaleha miboilel gufei. Aleha is not to be used for a drasha. It's needed for its own sake. To tell you where to place the shnei gzirei eitzim. Perhaps he would place it on the mizbeach next to the marach. How do you know it's meant to be placed on a marach? The pasuk contains a double mention of aleh. One to tell you place it on a maracha, and one to indicate that there's a choice here. The other one has been already erected. The Torah has to tell you, put it in this one, not on that one. Apparently, he first arranges both marachas and then adds the wood. Let's continue. Shnei gzirei eitzim koidem l'dishur mizbeach hapnimi. The shnei gzirei eitzim precede cleaning out the mizbeach hapnimi. Why? Af agav da'chaksiv b'boker b'boker. Although they seem to be equal in value, as far as the way that the Torah relates them and describes them, as far as the wording in the pasuk, we find a similar reference in both. When it comes to shnei gzirei eitzim, hachaksiv b'boker b'boker. The morning, which indicates earliness. V'achaksiv, as well as when it comes to cleaning out the mizbeach, what does the pasuk say? Ba'boker ba'boker. The full pasuk reads as follows: V'hiktur olav iron Ketores samim ba'boker ba'boker be'tivoi es haneros yaktivran. So Aaron will bring the Ketores, hatavas haneros, and the fact that it says that he'll bring the Ketores at that point, says Rashi, obviously he had to first clean up the mizbeach. You can't place the Ketores on a mizbeach full of ashes. It creates a barrier between the Ketores and the mizbeach. So the fact that the pasuk describes him as bringing the Ketores to the mizbeach, it automatically, by default, is indicating that he has to first clean up the mizbeach. And what term is used in this pasuk to describe the timing of these events? Ketores and hatavas neres, ba'boker ba'boker. So we have the word ba'boker ba'boker on both accounts. When it comes to placing the shnei gzirei eitzim, when it comes to cleaning up the mizbeach hapnimi. So why would you favor shnei gzirei eitzim over dishur mizbeach hapnimi? How do you know which one comes first? Afilu hachi machshir adif. Says more, even though as far as the terminology, ba'boker ba'boker is stated in both accounts, but placement of wood on the mizbeach stands higher. Machshir adif. Machshir means when something enables, is a preparation for a carbon, that's considered superior to merely cleaning up the mizbeach. And therefore, says the Gemara, adding wood on the Mizbeach, which eventually supply the coals for the Ketores, that's considered a more chashav avodah than simply cleaning off the Mizbeach, and therefore that goes first. Before we continue, the interesting kasha, Tosfos asks, forget Machshir Adif. Forget about that answer. Why can't the Gemara simply say, because this one is more common? Placing wood in the Mizbeach is Tadr. It's a more frequently done avodah. It's done twice a day. As opposed to cleaning off the Mizbeach HaPnimi, which was a once daily event. And we know that Tadr v'she'ena Tadr, Tadr Koidem. We have a choice of whether to proceed with something which is a frequent thing, a commonly done mitzvah, as opposed to something which is an infrequent thing, Tadr Adif. We start with the one which is more common. So why does the Gemara have to say a teretz, machshir adif? Very pashut. Gzira eitzim is Tadr. Says Tosfos. You meant to know that this klal only applies when these choices that he's facing are both equal in value, similar in nature. So it's a question of the oila or the chatas. Well, we say Tadr koidim. But when we have two things which are dissimilar, such as cleaning up the Mizbeach, which is cleaning something, it's siluk, removal, as opposed to placing wood on the Mizbeach, which is avodas matana, adding, contributing, it's a different realm. They're different. They don't relate to each other. We don't know why this would come before that or that before this. When there are different things, then you can't just say the more common and more frequent thing comes first. Maybe there's a reason you have to clean up first before adding. You have to clean up the table before setting it. And therefore, says Tosfos, you can't apply the general formula. Rather, the Gemara needs to resort to the new svara. Placing wood on the Mizbeach supersedes because it's a machshir, enables the akrava, and therefore comes first. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? Machshir ma'niyu. What's the machshir here? Shnei gzira eitzim? These two blocks of wood placed on the Mizbeach hachitzin ad ha'maracha gdoila? V'amris shnei gzira eitzim ha'maracha gdoila azli. You just told me that the pasuk which says ubira aleha is telling you to place those shnei gzira eitzim on the maracha gdoila, which is never used to supply coals for the Ketores. So what do you mean that the eitzim are the machshirim for Ketores? Amar b'yirmiyah shum eitzim. The fact is that wood, this type of material, shum eitzim, wood supplies the coals for Ketores. True, not this specific block of wood, but wood in concept is a machshir for Ketores, and in this context, all wood all wood relates to each other, and since wood is a machshir for Ketores, likewise, here as well, when it comes to Gzira Eitzim, this lends chashivas to the blocks of wood, even though, technically speaking, these blocks of wood will not supply for the Ketores, but it has that added milah, and therefore comes first. And it's done in advance of the Dishum Mizbeach HaPnimi. Ravina Amar, Hoil v'hischov marocha goymer. That's a different pshat. You know why Shnei Gzira Eitzim come before Dishum Mizbeach HaPnimi? Because just complete the task at hand. He had begun arranging the marocha gdoila, and now he has just a little bit to add. Shnei Gzira Eitzim, finish the marocha gdoila, and then proceed to the other job of Dishum Mizbeach HaPnimi. Rav Ashi Amar, he has another terence. Well, what was your kasha? Shnei Gzira Eitzim are done in advance of Dishum Mizbeach HaPnimi because the Eitzim are the machshir. Well, not these Eitzim. These go on the Maruch Gdoila. They don't supply coals for the Ketores. Rav Ashi Amar, Iloi Mashech Eitzim the Maruch HaShniyah. Suppose he has no wood to arrange the second Maruch. Miloi Ma'ayil Maruch Gdoila. Wouldn't he take coals from the large Maruch? So theoretically, the Maruch Gdoila can supply the Ketores, can provide coals for the Ketores. And these Shnei Gzira Eitzim, which are going to join the Maruch Gdoila, have that capacity as well. And therefore, we consider that everything on the Mizbeach as part of the Machshir for Ketores, which puts it ahead and above and higher than Dishur Mizbeach HaPnimi. Continues the Gemara. Let's move on. The Dishur Mizbeach HaPnimi, what did that come before? Koidem Latavas Chomesh Neiros, before cleaning and replenishing the 5 neiros on the menorah. My time, and why is that? Amar Abai, says Abai, I'll tell you the truth. Gemara Gemirnim. I accepted this from the Rabbanan, the Beis Medrash. This seems to be the accepted tradition, the order of events in the Beis Medrash. Svara L'Yadana, I can't really tell you the Svara, the reason for this. Why is it that Dishon Mizbech HaPnimi precedes Hatovas Chomesh Neiros of the Menorah? V'Rava Amar, he says, I'll tell you, it's very simple. K'Rish Lakish, in line with Rish Lakish's halacha, the Amar Rish Lakish, Ein Mavir Ala Mitzvahs. When one has an opportunity to do a mitzvah, which is before him, he's not meant to overlook that and bypass it and negate the mitzvah. And that explains the sequence of events. Why? Let's picture the kohen entering the heichal. B'mizbeach pagaberesh. What is he going to encounter first? The mizbeach. He's going to meet the mizbeach before he meets the menorah. And that explains why he has to tend to the mizbeach, clean it off first. You can't bypass that and go to the menorah. As important as the menorah is, but ein mavir al mitzvahs. Not meant to pass over a mitzvah opportunity which presents itself first. Why is it that the mizbeach is first? The sanya shulchan b'tzafin. When you walk into the heichal, so facing Marav, shulchan would be on your right, b'tzafin. Moshech ben hakoisel shtei amos u'mechza. It was 2.5 amos away from that wall. Rashi explains to allow the Kehanim going side by side, 2 Kehanim to walk between the shulchan and the wall. U'menorah was on the other side, b'darim, on the left side. Moshech ben hakoisel shtei amos u'mechza, likewise, 2.5 amos from the wall. And the mizbeach was where? Right in the middle. Mizbeach memutza v'oimid, be'emtza, right in the middle. But not between the shulchan and the menorah. Rather, it was pulled out a bit towards the entranceway of the heichal. U'mashach klapi chutz kima. And it was a bit pulled out towards the chutz, towards the entranceway, but not directly between the shulchan and the menorah. So when you walk into the heichal, the first thing you meet is the mizbeach. Like a triangle. On the right side you have the shulchan, on the left the menorah, and closer to you, balanced between these two, but closer to you, was the mizbeach. So you have the mizbeach, the shulchan, the menorah, like a triangle. Says the Gemara, v'nukmei lahadayu. Why didn't he put the mizbeach in line with the other kelim, with the shulchan, the menorah? Kivin dechsiv v'samenorah nechach shulchan. Since the pasuk says that the menorah is meant to be situated directly opposite the shulchan, we need an unobstructed view from one to the other. We need that they should be situated directly opposite each other without any obstruction. They should see each other. Apparently the mizbeach was pulled away a bit, closer to the entranceway, in which case he will meet the mizbeach first. He has to clean it off first. Amar Rava. Says Rava, we'll take it a step further. Shema mina mit Rish Lakish. Based on this halacha of Rish Lakish, we can learn another halacha. We can apply it to tefillin as well. Avuri dra, to bypass the tefillin placed on one's arm, droya in Aramish is like zroya. To overlook the zroya, the tefillin shal yad, atoy tefta, for the sake of donning the tefillin shal roish. Also, you may not do that. Tefillin shal roish is more kaddish than shal yad. It has a shem Hashem, but you can't pass over the shal yad to do the shal roish first. Also, because ein mavir al mitzvahs, and as you proceed up to your head, your hand is passing by the arm. You have to grab that opportunity and do that first, and then proceed to tefillin shal roish. Hechi of it, rather, what is the correct way of putting on the tefillin? Midra'ah. L'tei tefta. You begin from the tefillin shal yad and proceed up to the tefillin shal rosh. Asks Tosfos, it's pasha that tefillin shal yad come before shal rosh. The Gemara Menachos tells us, based on a pasuk, ukshartam le'oisal yadecha v'hayu l'tei tafos bein einecha, that the tefillin shal rosh l'tei tafos bein einecha is meant to be the second to be put on, because it's meant to have two. B'hayu, when you have the tetavos bein einecha, first goes shal yad, now shal rosh. Forget about ein mavir al mitzvahs. Tefillin requires this type of sequence. Says Tosfos, evidently the Gemara is not speaking about the order of placing the tefillin on oneself. That we know from the other Gemara. He learns the Gemara here a bit differently. He brings the name of Rabbi Goyen. The Gemara is speaking about removing your tefillin. When he places it back in the tikshal tefillin, the case, he must do it in a way which will ensure that tomorrow, when he approaches his tefillin again, he won't have to reach past the tefillin shorosh to get to the shal yad, in which case he's going to go be maver on the mitzvah. He's going to pass over the shorosh, which is inappropriate. Ein maver on mitzvahs. Rather, he should set things up as follows. He should first insert the tefillin shorosh on bottom. Apparently they would stack them one on top of the other. So first put the shorosh in, and then on top of the shorosh place the shal yad, so that tomorrow he'll reach in for the shal yad first, put it on, and then proceed to the shorosh. So that's what the Gemara means. Avuri dra, to advance the tefillin shal yad into the case, ate tefta pride to the shorosh, which will lead to something inappropriate tomorrow. Will cause him to have to jump over the shorosh to get to the shal yad. Also, he shouldn't do that. Hechi Avid, rather, what should he do? Midral to tefta. He should place things in the tefillin case in a way which will enable him to go tomorrow from Zroya to Rosh, from shal yad to shal rosh, without having to pass over anything else. He actually means the third pshat name of Rabbi Eliyahu. The Gemara is not speaking about putting on tefillin, taking off, rather le'inyan mishmash, regarding tapping the tefillin. Throughout davening, we sometimes tap the tefillin to make ourselves aware of the fact that we're wearing tefillin. And you meant to tap the shal yad and then the shal rosh, in order. This way you're not passing over the shal yad. Rather do it first on shal yad and then proceed to shal rosh. Avuri dra atatafta asa. You may not do the shal rosh before the shal yad. So three pshat in the Gemara. According to Rashi, we're speaking about the seder of levisha's tefillin. According to Tosfos, seder of chalita's tefillin and placing it back in the tik. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the seder of mishmosh tefillin. Continues the Gemara back to the seder of the avodas in the Beis Hamikdash. Va'atavas chamesh neiros koidem l'dam hatamid. First, you tend to the 5 neiros in the menorah, clean them out, replenish the supplies, and then proceed to the dam hatamid, which according to Rashi means the shchita and zrika of the tamid shel shachar. The dam hatamid koidem l'atava shtei neiros, which precedes the atava of the final 2 neiros. My time, how do we get to this seder? Amar Abaye. Hahu ba'boiker, the shnei gzirei. In the pasuk which tells us to place shnei gzirei on the mizbeach, we have the words ba'boiker. Says Rashi, says Abaye, those words are superfluous, unneeded. They're unneeded. Why? Because we've already concluded that shnei gzirei are meant to be first. Before you proceed to the Dishim Mizbeach, we said Machshir Adib, because that supplies the carbon, the calls for the Ketores. So why does the pasuk have to elaborate and say, well, bring it early, but Boiker is meant to precede other avodas? It's unnecessary discussion, and we have a halacha, we have a formula in Shas that whenever we have unneeded words, we export them elsewhere and apply it to something else. Shadin ulacha, apply it to here. What does it mean here? So the context on hand to the dam hatamid, to the tava of the menorah. As follows. Chad, one of those baboikers, we have 2 extra ones, one of them, shadi l'atavas chamesh neiros. We'll apply it to the atava of the 5 neiros of menorah. The ligdami l'tam hatamid, which will result in it being done in advance of the dam hatamid. We'll add the urgency to it, or make it earlier. V'chad, and the other word baboika, which is extra, we'll export it to the dam hatamid. Shadi l'dam hatamid. We'll add it to dam hatamid. The nigdamei l'atavas shteneris, which will result in dam hatamid being done in advance of the final 2 neiros of the menorah, the atava of those neiros. As the Gemara explains, Chad shadi l'atavas chamesh neiros. One of those baboikers, we're going to export and apply it to atava shtei neiros, which will indicate that it's meant to come before dam hatamid. Why? Because actually, we have another pasuk which mentions Baboiker Baboiker. We have a double mention of Baboiker. And that pasuk discusses the Atava Samanor. The full pasuk reads as follows: V'hiktur olav aron k'teres samim Baboiker Baboiker by tivoy saneres aktivnanu. So we have a double Baboiker by Hatava Saneres. We already have two. Now we're going to add a third Baboiker. We're going to take those two words, Baboiker Baboiker by Gzirim, which are unneeded there, and export them. One of them will go to Hatava Shteineres, which already had two, had a double Baboiker. We're going to add a third one. It's going to have a triple Baboiker, which indicates even earlier, even more earliness. So again, Chad, one of those Baboikers, Shadi Latavas Chamesh Neres, will apply to Hatavas Chamesh Neres. The Ligdim Damatamid, in order to have it come in advance of Damatamid. Why? The Hachat Lasa. Because Hatavas Chamesh Neres, which began with a double Baboiker and ended with a triple Baboiker, that comes before Damatamid, which only has two. Vachat Trey. Damatamid only has two because it started with one. A pasuk which says, "Esakevas echat asa baboiker." You meant to bring the tamid of baboiker, so it has one. We just added another one. We exported from Shnei Gzir Eitzim and applied it to tamid. So now he has two. Hatavas Chamesh Neres has three. So three comes before two. Baboiker, baboiker, baboiker indicates earliness before the damatamid. V'chad shadi damatamid, and the second baboiker we had added to damatamid. The nigdemei latavash Shteineres. In order so that it precedes the Atava of the last two Neres of the B'nai. How's that? Damatamid started with one Baboiker, we just added another one, for a total of two. In which case, it tells us to make it earlier than what? Then cleaning out the final two Neres of the B'nai. Now we have a kasha. Avagav da hacha trei, vacha trei. In both cases, we have a double Baboiker. Although Damatamid now has two, but Atavas Neres also has two. Pasuk says, "Baboiker baboiker by Tavas Neres." So why does Damatamid take precedence? Mechaper Adav. Says the Gemara, because the Olam, although it's not coming on account of a Malach on Shabbos or whatever, but it's coming to be Mechaper on something. Rashi explains on an essay. It's a essay is addressed by the Olam. A Lois essay, which is Nitik Lasay, a less severe Lois essay, is addressed by the Olas HaTamid. Since Tamid has that added element of Kapara, it stands higher than a Tavash Shteineres. So that's how we get the order of Tishum Mizbeach HaPnimi first, because Ein Mavir Al Mitzvahs. We move over to Hatavas Chamesh Neres, which have a triple Baboiker, over to Damatamid, which has a double Baboiker, over to Hatavash Shteineres. Although it has double Baboiker, but it's not a Machaper, and therefore it follows Damatamid, which is a Machaper. Amalei Rapapal Abaye. One second, I have another approach, which will perhaps result in a different type of arrangement. Fine, you have two extra Baboikers ready for export. Perhaps let's export them in a different way. Perhaps one of these Baboikers will be applied to cleaning out the Mizbeach HaPnimi. The nigdemei l'damatamid, so that it is done in advance of damatamid. Why? Because Dishim Mizbeach HaPnimi was included in that pasuk of Hatavas HaNeres, which had a double Baboiker. So it started with two Baboikers. Now you added a third one. One of those two unneeded Baboikers was added to Dishim Mizbeach HaPnimi for a total of three Baboikers, which makes it come before Damatamid, which only has two Baboikers. Damatamid had one, naturally one, in the pasuk, and we added another one of those two extra ones. We exported it to Damatamid. So Damatamid has two. Dishim Mizbeach has three. So why don't we say export it in that way? In which case, Dishim Mizbeach HaPnimi will come before Damatamid. So again, ve'emachad shadi Dishim Mizbeach HaPnimi. One Baboiker will be applied to Dishim Mizbeach HaPnimi, so that it advances the Tamid. The nigdemei l'damatamid. Why da'achat lasa? Because Dishim has three Baboikers, v'achat trei, and Damatamid only has a double Baboiker. V'chad shadi Damatamid. The second Baboiker, the added one, the extra one, will be added to Damatamid, who already had one, but now he has two. What's the point of adding another one? The nigdaim l'Hatavas Chamesh Neres, so that it's done in advance of the 5 Neris, the Atava of the 5 Neris of the Menorah. Why would you say that? The Af Agav the Trey, because although Dam Atava now has 2 Babakers, and Atavas Neris also has 2, naturally so, in the Pasuk of Atava we have a double Babaker. Why would I suggest that Dam Atava is done in advance of the Atavas Chamesh Neris? Machaper Atif, because Tamid is Machaper and that comes first. So why can't this be the arrangement? Instead of saying that Disha Mizbeach HaPnimi comes before Hatavas Chamesh Neris, which is followed by Dam HaTamid, followed by Hatavas Shtei Neris. Perhaps Disha Mizbeach HaPnimi comes first, okay, followed by Dam HaTamid, and then Hatavas Chamesh Neris, then Hatavas Shtei Neris. Says the more, technically you're right, but this is going to create a concern, because we know that the Hatava of the Neris are meant to be split, meant to be done in 2 phases. First 5, cleaned and replenished, and then the other 2. Now, once you advance the Dam HaTamid and do it in advance of the Hatavas HaMenorah, you have nothing left. No avoida left to be used as a mafsik in the Hatava. Everything's been used up. You've depleted your entire supply of avoides. In Cain, if we go your route, afsuki b'may ma'afsikaslu, which avoid are you going to use to intersect between the Hatavas and Neris? And we know you have to have a hafsaka. Apparently, the Dam HaTamid waits and is done in the middle of the Hatavas HaNeris. You do 5 Neris, stop and do Dam HaTamid, and then finish the Hatava. Now, your approach, your suggestion that we should advance the Dam HaTamid to the entire Hatava can work theoretically, according to Rish Lakish. The Amar Lama Metivin, v'choyzim Metivin. He came to answer the question, why? Why is it that we do Hatava in 2 steps? With Metiv Neris, 5, and then we stop, and we come back and do another 2. To create a tumult, a milling around, a commotion in the Azara. We start with the 5, we go back into the Azara, we go back into the Heichal, back and forth. That creates a commotion and gives chashivas and significance to the Avodah. Pasuk says, it's covered to the Avodah to Hashem. Sharper. So that would work well, meaning, according to him, just make a break. You don't need a Avodah in between the Hatavas. Do Dam HaTamid before. Then proceed to the Menorah, clean out 5, take a 15-minute recess, walk in, walk out, make a tumult, make a commotion, and come back and do the rest. So theoretically, according to Rish Lakish, your kasha stands. Elo Rabbi Yechanan, but according to Rabbi Yechanan, it won't work. Rabbi Yechanan, the Amar, Ba'boiker. How do we know that this is meant to be a hefsek in the middle of the Hatava? Because the pasuk says Hatava is meant to take place Ba'boiker. We learn Chalkeu l'shnei bekarim. Split the Hatava into 2 time zones, so to speak. Do partial Hatava, then go and do another Avodah, and then complete the Hatava afterwards. Michael and Neymar, according to that, you can't suggest your idea that Dam HaTamid precedes the Hatava Saneris because there's no Avodah left to be used for that hefsek in the middle of the Hatava. Apparently, says the Gemara, this is the way to go. You do Disha Mizbeach HaPnimi, then you proceed to the Hatavas Chamesh Neris, take a break, you do Dam HaTamid, then conclude the Hatavas Shtei Neris. Amali Ravina Ravashi. Hi, Baboika de Eitzim, Mimiyater. You're working with an assumption that Baboika stated by Eitzim, by the Shnegzir Eitzim, are needed and can be used for export. We need it for its own sake. Perhaps the Torah is simply telling us that Sidur Shnegzir Eitzim are meant to be before what? Before arranging this second Maruch of Ketores. So the words are needed to indicate timing, to indicate earliness. Amar Leis, he responded, we've already addressed that. V'lav Kimna, haven't we learned the pasuk Aleha? Pasuk says, place the Gzir Eitzim Aleha V'lo Chaverta. Aleha is a drasha coming to tell us you're faced with a choice. Put it on the large maracha, not on the small one, which indicates to us that there's already a small one waiting. There's already a small one built. Apparently the second one is there already. So what does that tell us about the sequence? That Gzira Eitz are meant to be placed after arranging both arrangements. First the Maracha Gdoila, Maracha Shniya, and followed by Shnei Gzira Eitz. So really there's a conflict between these terms. Baboker would indicate earliness, preceded, do it in advance of the Maracha Shniya, but allow indicates otherwise. In fact, the Torah is telling you put it on the large Maracha indicates that there's a small one there already. So rather than get into conflict, focus on Aleha, which tells you there's another one there already. Gzira Eitzim follows the arrangement of both Marachis. The fact that it says Baboker, just export it elsewhere. Okay, says the Gemara, we do Hatava in 2 stages. But why in this manner? Maishna. Why is it that we do as follows? The Avid Hatava is Chamash Neiros Bereishit. First you tend to 5 Neiros, and then the other 2. The Avid Hatava Shtei Neiros Bereishit. Perhaps do the other way around. Clean up the first 2 Neiros, and then the 5 later. Kivan the Aschal B'hu, once he began, Avid Ruban proceeds and does most of them. When the Avid Shis, okay, then go all the way, go till 6. And leave only 1 for later. Amakra, Beitivoy Esaneris Aktivana. When he tends to the Neiros, then he'll bring the Turis. Ve'in Neiros, Neiros Lashon Rab, Ve'in Neiros Pchusish Mishtayim. Neiros is plural, no less than 2. Every step of the way, every part of the Hatavas HaNeiros must involve at least 2 Neiros. So you can't leave less than 2 for the second phase. So it's 5 and then 2. V'atav Ashtei Neiros Kodemis L'Kteris. We learned that Atav Ashtei Neiros precedes Hakteris Kteris. How do we know? The Amakra Beitivois HaNeiros. First he cleans up the Neiros. V'hadar, and afterwards it says Yaktirena. He'll bring the Kteris. Very simple. We learn further. Ukteris Leivar. Hakteris precedes a Varei Karban Tamid. The Sanya. Why? We learned in the Brayso Yugdam Davar Shanama Baboker. The Kteris, which contains the term Baboker, is meant to precede and be done in advance of L'davar Shanama Baboker Echad, to something which only contains a once mentioning of Boker, which is the Oila, which says, Pasuk says, Akevas Echad Tasa Baboker. So a single Boker is meant to follow something which has a double Boker, which indicates earliness. So it's meant to come before a Davar Shalem by Ella Boker Echad Bilvat. Ve'ivarim L'minch. Be'imak to the Ivari Karban Tamid come before the Mincha of the Tamid, the Sanya. Menayin Shlo Davar Koidem Tamid Shal Shacha. From where do we learn? That no other Karban, no other Aktara is meant to take place before the Aktara of the Karban Tamid Shal Shacha. Tamalaymar V'arach Aleha Oila. On the firewood arrangement, he's meant to place the Oila. Ha-Oila. What does Ha-Oila mean? B'amarava. Ha-Oila, He Oila Rishona, indicating the first, the unique one, the first one brought on the typical day in the Beis HaMikdash, the Tamid Shal Shacha, and that's meant to come first. So first the Karban Tamid with the Eivarim, and then afterwards the other type of Aktara, the Mincha. U'Mincha L'Chavit. The Mincha comes before Chavitim. Why? We have a pasuk in Vayikra Chav Gimel which says Oila U'Mincha, which indicates that Oila and Mincha are a package deal. So first the Oila, and then the Mincha, and then afterwards other things. The Chavitin come before Linasachim. Why is that? Shum Mincha. Because Chavitin, although supplied by the Kohen Gadol, are not really part of the Karban Tamid, but it's still a type of Mincha. It's Shum Mincha. It's Mincha related, and therefore, just as Oila goes together with Mincha, Chavitin also gets bundled along, so it's Oila, Minchas Nesachim, and then Chavitin, which is a type of Mincha. And then we have the Nesachim, and then the Musaf. Unusachim Musafim, why? Zevach Unusachim. A pasuk of Midbar Chav Ches, Zevach Unusachim, actually in Vayikra Chav Gimel, Zevach Unusachim, Dvar Yoy B'Yoymai. So we see that Zevach is meant to be followed by Nesachim. They're a package deal. Umusaf and Bezichan. We learned that Musafim precede the Bezichan, the spoons of the Levina taken with the Lechem Apanim. Vatanya, but we learned in the Brayso, Bezichan. Koidim L'Musafim. First Bezichan, then Musafim. Tanoi. It's Machlekes Tanoi. Amr Abai. mistavra. The correct approach seems to be Kimanda Omar, in line with the Manda Omar, that Musafin koidmin bazichan. First Musafin, then bazichan. Why? Lav mi amrit. Babayke lahaktim. Haven't you just told me that when we have a double mention of Babayke, what does that tell you? Earliness. To proceed, to advance. Hachanami. Here as well, when it comes to the baziche, lavoyna avdachma apanim, bayoim, la'achar. The fact that the Torah has a double mentioning of the word bayoim, it tells you lateness. Bayoim means into the day, later. And therefore this shita will hold that bazichen follows musafin. If that's the case, how do we explain the other shita? That bazichen come before musafin. My time at the Manda Omar bazichen koidem musafin. Gomar chuka mechavit. He applies a clear shava. By both chavitin and bazichen we have a lashon chayk. We connect the two, and just as chavitin brought earlier in the day, before the musafin, likewise the baziche lechem apan. Well, if he learns from chavitin, ligmra kula milsa mehasam. Let him go all the way. Learn everything from there. Do it very early, even before the nesachim, just as the chavitin are brought before nesachim. That's the point that the Torah is saying bayoim, a double bayoim la'achar, to tell you lateness. So you pull in both directions. Bayoim tells you bring the bazichen later on in the day. Chukah tells you to bring it earlier. So you strike a compromise. You don't bring it so late. Don't bring it after the musafin. You proceed the musafin, but after the nesachim. So first you bring the entire package of the Talmud Shal Shachar with the nesachim, and then immediately afterwards you follow with the bazichel avonim v'lachem apanim, and then the musafin. So that's the shita. But Abaye actually was following the other shita when he said that first it's the musafin, and only afterwards the bazichel. Okay, let's make a brief chazor of today's daf. We learned that Abaye was Mesadeh the Marocha. He presented the daily schedule, Mishmei the Gemara. We begin with arranging the Marocha G'doil on the Mizbeach. The Pasuk says, Hi'a'il al Moita. It's mentioned first in the Pasuk. It comes before the small arrangement of firewood, the Marocha Shnia, intended for coals, for the Ketores. Why does Marocha G'doil proceed? Because it accommodates all the Karbonis, Kappa Ramaz Meruba. And theoretically, it can also supply for the Ketores. It's Roy for the Ketores Bifnim. It's followed by the Marocha Shnia for the Ketores, which is described in the words of Eisham Azbeach Tukat Boy, and that comes before the Shnei Gzira Eitzim, because the Pasuk says, Ubir Aleha Kohen Eitzim. The Kohen will place the Eitzim Aleha on the large one, not on the small one, which is already there. Then it's followed by Shnei Gzira Eitzim, as we learned, Bir Aleha Kohen Eitzim Boiker Boiker. It comes before Dishim Azbeach Apnimi. Why? Because wood is a machshir for the Ketores, and that comes before just cleaning up the Mizbeach, and also another reason, because it's completing the arrangement, the marocha of the Mizbeach, followed by Dishim Mizbeach HaPnimi, because that's the Mizbeach that he's going to encounter before the menorah, Ein Mavir al Mitzvahs, followed by Atavas Chamesh Neris, which have a triple Babaker, followed by Shchitas Rikas Atamid, which have a double Babaker. That comes before Atavas Shtei Neris, which also has a double Babaker, because the Tamid is Mechaper, and that's Adif. Then it's followed by Ketores, by Tivas Neris, and then Yakti Rena, followed by Vore Atamid, because the pasuk says Baruch Aleh ha'oila. Everything associated with the oila comes first before other karbanos. Followed by the mincha, the pasuk says oila u'mincha. Followed by chavitim, which is a type of mincha. Followed by nesachim, the pasuk says zevach u'nesachim. It's a package deal. Followed by misafin. Then over to bazicha lechem apanim, because it says bayoim twice to indicate lateness. According to the other sheet, bazichen come before musafins because of the Gzeir Shava. We connect it to chavitim, which come earlier. And finally, Tamid Shebin Abayim, because the pasuk says Aleha Chelvi Ashlamim, that regarding Tamid Shel Shachar, together with that, you meant to take all the other karbanis, Aleha Hashlam Kol Karbanis Kulam, which indicates that Tamid Shel Abayim is an independent standalone carbon which follows all the karbanis of the day. Hatzlacha Rabbi to you and cult.